Hello dear ones, I am Margaret, and at 65 years old, I thought I had seen every family surprise there was. But last Tuesday at our weekly family dinner, my 62-year-old brother Tommy dropped a bombshell that made me smile wider than I had in months. When he announced he was moving into my beloved cottage, I had news of my own that would change everything. Before we continue, first let me thank you for watching Granny's Voice. Please subscribe and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. We might give you a shout out in our next video. Today's special shout out goes to Yvette Paling from Virginia. Thank you for being part of our family. Now, let me tell you everything. Where you are watching from today. Give this video a thumbs up if you have ever had to teach a grown family member about responsibility the hard way. Growing up in small-town Pennsylvania, Tommy and I were raised by parents who believed in hard work and earning your keep. Papa ran the local hardware store while Mama kept house and tended our vegetable garden. We learned early that nothing came free in life. Well, most of us learned that lesson. Tommy, being the baby by 3 years, seemed to have a different set of rules. From the very beginning, when we were children, I would spend summer mornings helping Mama with the washing and afternoons helping Papa organize inventory at the store. Tommy would disappear on his bicycle until dinner time, returning with grass stains and excuses about why he could not help with chores. Our parents always said he was just a free spirit who would find his way eventually. This pattern continued through our school years. I studied hard, maintained excellent grades, and earned a scholarship to Teachers College through dedication and long hours of studying. Tommy coasted through high school with barely passing grades, spending more time at the local soda fountain than in the library. When graduation came, I left for college with a suitcase full of hand-sewn clothes and a head full of dreams. Tommy enlisted in the army, claiming he needed adventure and structure. He returned after 2 years with stories about how the sergeants did not understand his creative approach to military life. Instead of discipline, he had learned new ways to avoid responsibility. After college, I returned home and started teaching at the elementary school where I had once been a student. I saved every penny, living in a small apartment above the bakery and walking to work each day. My goal was simple: buy a little cottage where I could plant roses and read books on lazy Sunday afternoons. Tommy drifted between jobs like a leaf in the wind. He tried working at the lumber mill but quit after a month, saying the work was too demanding. He attempted to help Papa at the hardware store, but customers complained about his casual attitude toward their problems. He even tried his hand at insurance sales but could never be bothered to learn the policies he was supposed to sell. Each failure came with elaborate explanations about difficult bosses, unfair working conditions, or simply bad timing. Never once did Tommy look in the mirror and ask what he might do differently. Through all these years, our parents continued to support him financially. They paid his rent when he came up short, bought him groceries when his cupboards were bare, and even purchased him a reliable truck when his old car finally died. They claimed he just needed time to find himself, but I worried they were actually preventing him from growing up. When I turned 30, after 8 years of careful saving and pinching pennies, I finally had enough money to buy my dream cottage. It sat on half an acre just outside town, with white picket fences, climbing roses, and a front porch perfect for morning coffee. The house needed some work, but I fell in love with the cozy kitchen, the built-in bookcases, and the large windows that let sunshine stream across the hardwood floors. The day I signed the papers and received those precious keys, I sat in my car and cried tears of pure joy. This little cottage represented every sacrifice I had made. Every weekend I had spent grading papers instead of socializing, every vacation I had skipped to save money. It was more than just a house. It was proof that dreams could come true with enough patience and hard work. My parents came to my housewarming party and seemed genuinely proud of what I had accomplished. Mama brought her famous apple pie while Papa helped me hang pictures and fix a loose step on the front porch. They gave me a beautiful set of gardening tools as a gift, knowing how much I looked forward to planting my own vegetables. For once, I felt like my achievements were being celebrated instead of overshadowed by whatever crisis Tommy was facing that week. Tommy arrived 2 hours late to the party, empty-handed and immediately began complaining about his latest romantic troubles to anyone who would listen. When he finally looked around my cottage, his only comment was to ask if I would let him store some furniture in my basement since his apartment was too small. I politely declined, which led to several days of pouty phone calls about how I had become selfish since buying my own place. He seemed unable to understand that my home was not a storage facility for his belongings. The next 30 years were the happiest of my life. I painted every room in colors that made me smile, planted a garden that provided fresh vegetables all summer long, and slowly filled the cottage with antiques and family heirlooms. I hosted holiday dinners, birthday parties, and book club meetings in my cozy living room. The mortgage was manageable on my teacher's salary, and I took great pride in maintaining my property without help from anyone else. Meanwhile, Tommy continued his lifelong pattern of starting things he never finished. He moved in with a girlfriend, then back to his apartment when she grew tired of supporting him 3 months later. He started a landscaping business but quit when he realized it required getting up early and working in all weather conditions. He borrowed money from our parents to buy equipment for a painting business, then used it for a vacation to Florida instead. Every family gathering featured another Tommy drama, with Mama and Papa shaking their heads but never actually requiring him to change his ways. Last spring, Tommy lost his job at the post office after too many complaints about late deliveries and poor customer service. At the same time, his landlord decided not to renew his lease due to constant noise complaints from neighbors about his loud music and late-night visitors. At 62 years old, my brother was once again facing unemployment and homelessness through his own poor choices. I learned about these developments during my weekly phone call with Mama, who spent 20 minutes lamenting how unfair everyone was being to her baby boy. She ended the conversation with strange comments about how family needs to stick together during hard times and how we older folks should look out for each other more. I thought she was just feeling emotional about Tommy's situation, but looking back, I should have paid more attention to the hint she was dropping. If I had been listening more carefully, I might have realized that plans were being made behind my back. Plans that involved my cottage and my comfortable retirement. The first sign that something unusual was happening came when I received 4 separate phone calls from my parents in 1 week instead of our usual Sunday evening chat. Each call mentioned vague family matters that needed to be discussed, but when I asked for details, they would say things like, better to talk face to face, and just some ideas we want to share with you. Even stranger were the sudden text messages from Tommy after months of barely hearing from him. He wanted to know about my internet service and how fast it was. He asked which bedroom got the best morning light and whether my neighbors minded noise in the evenings. When I asked why he needed this information, he just said he was curious and changed the subject quickly. My suspicions really started growing when Tommy called asking about the size of my spare bedroom. Could a large bed fit in there? How much closet space did it have? The room he was asking about was my craft room where I quilted and did needlepoint projects. It had never contained a bed, and I had no intention of changing that arrangement. Still, I was busy preparing for summer vacation Bible school at church and dismissed his odd questions as typical Tommy behavior. That week was particularly stressful at school. The principal had asked me to organize the end-of-year talent show, which meant staying late every afternoon to help children practice their acts. On top of that, my cottage developed a serious problem with the old plumbing system. What started as a small drip under the kitchen sink quickly became a major issue with the main water line running from the street. The plumber delivered the expensive news with an apologetic shrug. Fixing everything properly would cost nearly $8,000, money I did not have sitting in my checking account. This plumbing disaster came right after I had spent $3,000 replacing the furnace and another $2,000 fixing the roof after a storm. My little cottage was showing its age, and the repair costs were adding up faster than my teacher's pension could handle. I had used most of my savings and was now facing the possibility of going into debt for the first time in my adult life. In a moment of practical thinking over emotional attachment, I called my financial advisor to discuss my options. Dorothy had helped me plan for retirement and had always given me sound advice about money matters. After reviewing my situation, she asked a question I had been avoiding thinking about. "Margaret, have you considered selling the cottage? The real estate market is very strong right now, especially for charming properties like yours. You could probably get much more than you paid for it 30 years ago." The thought of selling my beloved cottage felt like betrayal at first. This house had been my sanctuary, my pride and joy, my reward for decades of hard work. But as Dorothy explained the numbers, I began to see the wisdom in her suggestion. Continuing to pour money into expensive repairs would drain my retirement savings and leave me financially stressed during what should be my golden years. Being house poor was affecting my peace of mind and my ability to enjoy the retirement I had worked so hard to earn. That evening, I called my real estate agent friend Susan, who had helped me buy the cottage all those years ago. She came over the next morning, walking through my home with the professional eye of someone who understood market values rather than sentimental attachment. Her assessment confirmed what Dorothy had suggested. I could list the cottage for significantly more than I had originally paid, and likely receive multiple offers from buyers eager to own a piece of small-town charm. "Would you be comfortable with a quick sale if we found the right buyer?" Susan asked. "I have a young family who just moved to town for his new job at the bank. They are looking for exactly this type of property and have already been approved for financing. Sometimes the universe sends clear messages about what we need to do." The next day, the family Susan mentioned came to see my cottage while I was at the school's spring carnival. By evening, they had submitted an offer for $10,000 above my asking price. With only one condition: they needed to close quickly before the new school year started so their children could settle in. In return, they offered to let me rent the cottage back for 2 months after the sale while I found a new place to live. The decision was both heartbreaking and obviously correct. I accepted their generous offer and signed the preliminary paperwork that same evening. The home inspection was scheduled for the following week, giving me just enough time to process this major life change before attending our regular family dinner that Sunday. I decided not to tell my family about the sale until all the paperwork was signed and the deal was completely final. Real estate transactions can fall through unexpectedly, and I wanted to be certain before dealing with everyone's reactions and opinions. More importantly, I needed time to adjust to this decision myself before helping others understand it. The inspection went smoothly with only minor issues that I agreed to fix before closing. By Friday, all conditions had been met and the sale was moving forward without any problems. The closing was scheduled for the following Thursday, just 3 days before our next family dinner. I would walk into Sunday's meal with a signed deed transfer and a check representing my profit from 30 years of homeownership. As I prepared for dinner that weekend, my emotions were a complicated mix of sadness, relief, and anticipation. Sadness about leaving the cottage I loved, relief about solving my financial problems, and anticipation about starting a new chapter of my life. I also felt a growing uneasiness about Tommy's strange questions and my parents' mysterious phone calls about family business. I had no idea that my decision to sell would collide so dramatically with their secret plans, or that Sunday's dinner would become a turning point in all our relationships. For the first time in years, I was making a major life decision based entirely on my own needs rather than trying to accommodate everyone else's feelings and opinions. Sunday dinners at my parents' house had been a tradition since Tommy and I were teenagers. Even after we both moved out and started our adult lives, we maintained this weekly ritual through decades of changes and challenges. Mama always prepared a full feast with pot roast, mashed potatoes, and fresh vegetables from her garden. Papa would tell stories about his customers at the hardware store while we lingered over coffee and dessert. These gatherings had a comfortable rhythm that rarely changed. This particular Sunday I arrived at exactly 4 o'clock, right on time as always. The familiar smell of roast beef and apple pie greeted me as I walked through the front door. Mama had set the dining room table with her special china, which seemed unusual for our casual family meals. A bottle of sparkling cider sat chilling in an ice bucket on the counter, another departure from our typical dinner routine. "There is our punctual Margaret," Papa called from his favorite chair in the living room, turning down the volume on his baseball game. He stood to give me an unusually enthusiastic hug, patting my back with extra warmth. Right on time as always, our dependable girl. Mama emerged from the kitchen, untying her apron and smoothing her hair. Sweetheart, you look a bit tired. Are those spring allergies bothering you again? She hugged me tightly, then stepped back to examine my face with concern. You have been working too hard with all those end-of-school activities. Just the usual busy season, I replied, keeping my response vague. Something smells absolutely wonderful though. Can I help you carry anything? No, everything is ready. Tommy should be here any minute, she said, exchanging a meaningful look with Papa that I pretended not to notice. Why don't you sit down and relax? Your father opened that sparkling cider you like. I accepted a glass and took my usual spot on the couch, making small talk about the beautiful weather and Mama's flower garden. The conversation felt forced and artificial, with my parents constantly checking the clock and glancing toward the front door. At 15 minutes past 4, the front door opened and Tommy walked in as if being late was perfectly normal. Sorry folks, he announced without any real apology in his voice. Got caught up watching a movie and lost track of time. What caught my attention was not his typical lateness but his appearance. Tommy had gotten a haircut and was wearing clean dress pants with a button-down shirt instead of his usual wrinkled t-shirt and jeans. Most surprising of all, he carried a gift bag and what looked like a bottle of wine wrapped in paper. Tommy, don't you look nice? Mama gushed, accepting his offerings with delight. And you brought gifts. How thoughtful of you. Just wanted to contribute to our special celebration, he replied with a grin that made my stomach flutter with worry. Whatever was about to happen had been planned in advance, and I was clearly the only family member who did not know what we were celebrating. When we moved to the dining room, I noticed Tommy had been seated at the head of the table, Papa's usual spot. Papa took the opposite end while Mama and I sat on the sides. As we served ourselves roast beef, potatoes, and green beans, the conversation continued to feel rehearsed and unnatural. After a few minutes of awkward small talk, Mama cleared her throat and began what sounded like a prepared speech. Margaret, honey, that big cottage of yours must feel awfully lonely with just you rattling around in all those rooms. All that space going unused while you work so hard to maintain everything by yourself. I chewed my food slowly, sensing where this conversation was heading. Actually, Mama, the cottage is perfect for me. I use every room regularly for different activities. But surely it gets overwhelming. Papa jumped in before I could say more. All that yard work and home maintenance for one person. Family should help each other during challenging times. That is what we have always believed. Tommy nodded seriously, as if Papa had just shared profound wisdom instead of setting up whatever announcement was coming. Absolutely right. Family comes first, especially when someone is struggling. The meal continued with pointed comments about my cottage, the importance of family loyalty, and thinly disguised references to Tommy's recent streak of bad luck with jobs and housing. I noticed Tommy kept checking his phone, apparently waiting for the right moment. My parents continued exchanging glances full of anticipation. The sparkling cider remained unopened, clearly waiting for the main event of the evening. As Mama served her homemade coconut cake for dessert, Tommy pushed back his chair and stood up, reaching for the bottle of sparkling cider. I think it is time we shared the good news with Margaret, he announced, beginning to remove the foil wrapper from the bottle top. What good news? I asked, though a sinking feeling in my chest told me I probably did not want to know the answer. The cork came free with a cheerful pop that seemed completely wrong given the tension I was feeling. Tommy poured cider into four glasses that Mama had apparently prepared specifically for this moment. Well, as everyone knows, I have had some recent setbacks with my living situation, Tommy began, his tone suggesting he was about to announce a great achievement rather than another request for help. My landlord has been completely unreasonable about minor lease issues, and finding decent affordable housing is nearly impossible these days. I took a small sip of cider, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But every problem has a solution. When family works together, he continued, raising his glass with a satisfied smile. Mama, Papa, and I have been discussing the situation, and we have come up with the perfect arrangement that benefits everyone involved. He paused dramatically, clearly enjoying his moment in the spotlight. Starting this Saturday, I will be moving into Margaret's cottage. Just temporarily, of course, until I get back on my feet financially. The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. My parents beamed at Tommy, then turned expectant, faces toward me, waiting for my enthusiastic agreement with their plan. Tommy looked pleased with himself, as if he had cleverly solved everyone's problems with this arrangement. Mama and Papa explained that you have that extra bedroom that never gets used, Tommy added when I did not immediately respond. They figured since you spend so much time at school anyway, you probably would not even notice me there. Plus, I could help with the yard work and maybe split some of the utility costs. Mama nodded, encouragingly, her smile bright with false cheer. We thought it was the perfect solution, dear. Tommy needs a stable place while he looks for work, and you could use some help with that big property. Family helping family, just like when we were all growing up together. Papa added his support with what he clearly thought was compelling logic. It is not safe for a woman your age to live alone way out there anyway. Having Tommy around would give us all peace of mind about your security. I looked around the table. At their expectant faces, these people who had made detailed plans about my home and my life without bothering to ask my opinion. They had discussed my living situation, decided what would be best for me, and now expected me to thank them for their thoughtfulness. The presumption was breathtaking, but in that moment, a strange sense of calm settled over me. All the anxiety I had felt about telling them about the sale simply melted away. That certainly is an interesting plan, I said, my voice steady despite the anger simmering just beneath the surface. There is just one tiny problem with your arrangement. What problem could there be, honey? Mama asked, her confident smile beginning to waver slightly around the edges. I reached into my purse and pulled out the manila envelope containing the closing documents I had signed just 3 days earlier. I sold my cottage last week. The new owners take possession in 6 weeks. The silence that followed my announcement was absolute and profound. 3 pairs of eyes stared at me in complete shock and disbelief. Mama's hand flew to her heart in a gesture of surprise worthy of a soap opera. Papa's bushy eyebrows drew together in confusion and concern. Tommy's mouth actually fell open, his glass of sparkling cider frozen halfway between the table and his lips. You are joking, right? Tommy finally managed to speak, letting out a nervous laugh. This is some kind of payback prank for not telling me about your plans first. I removed the deed transfer and final closing documents from the envelope and placed them carefully on the table next to his untouched cake. The inspection was completed last Monday. All paperwork was finalized Wednesday, and we closed Thursday morning. The new family has a 7-year-old daughter who is very excited about the tire swing in the backyard. Papa picked up the legal documents, adjusting his reading glasses to examine them closely. His expression grew more serious as he realized I was telling the complete truth. Margaret, why would you make such a major decision without discussing it with your family first? This affects all of us. The irony of his statement was not lost on me for a single moment. You mean the same way you all discussed Tommy moving into my cottage before bothering to ask if I agreed to the arrangement? That is completely different, Mama protested quickly. We were trying to help both of you by finding a solution that worked for everyone. How exactly does having Tommy move into my home help me? I asked, my long-suppressed frustration beginning to leak through my carefully maintained composure. Tommy grabbed the papers from Papa and scanned them frantically, as if looking for some loophole or escape clause. You did this on purpose, he accused, slapping the documents back down on the table with unnecessary force. You found out somehow that I needed a place to stay, and you sold your cottage just to spite me. Not everything in this world revolves around you, Tommy, I replied, fighting to keep my voice level and controlled. I sold my cottage because the repair costs were becoming more than I could afford on my pension. The plumbing alone needed $8,000 worth of work, and that was after spending $5,000 on the furnace and roof repairs this year. That seems a bit extreme, Margaret, Papa said with disapproval in his voice. We could have helped you with those repair costs if you had just asked. A bitter laugh escaped before I could stop it. Really, Papa? The same way you helped me pay for college. Or helped me with my car repairs last year. Oh wait, that is right. I worked 2 jobs to pay my own way through school while Tommy got a free ride that he wasted. And when my transmission died, you told me to take the bus until I could save up for repairs. Your brother has always needed more support, Mama defended, tears beginning to well up in her eyes. Tommy has had a harder time finding his direction in life. He needs family backing to succeed. And whose fault is that? I challenged gently but firmly. You have been rescuing him from the consequences of his poor choices for so long that he never learned to be responsible for himself. Tommy pushed away from the table, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. I do not have to sit here and listen to this self-righteous nonsense from Miss Perfect. You have always acted like you were so much better than everyone else, Margaret. So superior with your teaching job and your precious cottage. I do not think I am better than anyone, I said quietly, feeling suddenly very tired. I just made different choices and worked hard for the things I wanted in life. Well, your choices have completely ruined my plans, Tommy snapped angrily. I already gave my landlord notice that I was moving out. I have to be gone by the end of this month. And now I have nowhere to go. Mama gasped in horror. Tommy, you already gave notice. We told you to wait until we talked to Margaret first. Tommy had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I was being proactive, Mama. The landlord was hassling me about complaints from the neighbors, and I figured why pay another month's rent when I could move in with Margaret instead. So you just assumed I would welcome you with open arms, I said, the full scope of his entitlement finally becoming clear. You made a major life decision based on access to my home without ever bothering to ask my permission. Because you would have said no, Tommy shouted, his face red with anger and embarrassment. You have always been selfish and stingy with family. That is enough, Papa commanded in the sharp voice he rarely used. This arguing is getting us nowhere productive. Margaret, is there any possibility you could cancel this sale? Maybe if you explained the family situation, the buyers would understand and let you out of the contract. I stared at him in complete amazement. Are you seriously asking me to break a legal contract, risk being sued, and definitely lose my earnest money so that Tommy can have a free place to live after I just explained that I needed to sell for financial reasons? We could help with some of the repair costs, Mama offered desperately, and maybe contribute toward utilities while Tommy stays with you. The sale is final and completely non-negotiable, I said firmly. And even if it were not, I would not cancel it for this reason. Tommy is 62 years old. He needs to solve his own housing problems like any other adult. Tommy pushed his chair back and stood up abruptly. Thanks for all the family support. Really feeling the love here. He stormed toward the front door, grabbing his jacket from the hall closet. Tommy, please wait, Mama called, starting to rise from her seat to follow him. Let him go, Mama, I said wearily. He needs time to cool down and think about realistic solutions to his problem. The front door slammed hard enough to make the windows rattle in their frames. Mama sank back into her chair with tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. How could you do this to your own brother? He is going to end up homeless because of your selfishness. He is not going to be homeless, I replied patiently. He has several options available to him. He could find a roommate to share expenses, rent a small efficiency apartment, or even stay here with you and Papa temporarily while he finds something permanent. Papa shifted uncomfortably at this last suggestion. Well, we would certainly offer if we could, but your mother has converted Tommy's old room into her sewing space, and we gave away all the furniture to charity last spring. You still have the guest room, I pointed out reasonably. That room is mainly used for storage now, Mama said quickly. Besides, Tommy needs his independence and privacy. He is too old to be living with his parents again. But not too old to live with his sister rent-free, I observed dryly. Papa sighed heavily, running his hands through his thinning hair. Margaret, please try to understand our position. We're just trying to help Tommy get established. You have always been so capable and self-sufficient. Tommy struggles with things that seem easy for you, because you never gave him the opportunity to develop those skills, I replied. Every time he faced a consequence for his actions, you rushed in to fix everything for him. How was he supposed to learn responsibility? We are his parents, Mama said defensively. That is what parents do for their children. No, Mama, that is what enablers do, I said as gently as I could manage. Real parental love means preparing your children for independence, not protecting them from reality forever. The conversation continued in exhausting circles for another hour. My parents alternated between guilt, trips about family loyalty, and suggestions for how I could still accommodate Tommy despite selling my cottage. Could I let him stay in my new apartment? Could I help pay his rent until he found steady work? Would I consider lending him money from my cottage sale proceeds? Each suggestion made it increasingly clear that they viewed my resources as a family safety net rather than my personal financial security. The money from selling my home was not seen as my retirement fund, but as a family emergency account that should be available to solve Tommy's problems whenever he created them. After what felt like hours of this circular conversation, I gathered my purse and the closing documents. I need to go home now. I have church early tomorrow morning, and I need to continue packing my belongings. Margaret, please, Mama began, but I held up my hand to stop her. I love you both dearly, but I cannot keep having this same argument. Tommy is a grown man, and his housing situation is his responsibility to solve. I hope you will help him find a realistic solution, but I need to focus on my own major life transition right now. Papa walked me to the front door in complete silence, his expression troubled and confused. As I turned to say goodbye, he surprised me by pulling me into a tight, warm hug. I am proud of you for making a difficult decision, he whispered in my ear. Even when we do not understand your choices, we know you think things through carefully. It was a small acknowledgement, but in that moment it meant everything to me. With tears threatening to overflow, I hurried to my car and drove back to my cottage, the weight of the evening settling heavily on my shoulders. The days following that disastrous family dinner were filled with a constant stream of phone calls, text messages, and even surprise visits from various relatives and family friends. My phone became a source of stress and anxiety, buzzing constantly with messages that ranged from guilt-inducing to downright hostile and accusatory. Tommy predictably led the assault with daily angry texts that evolved from, "I cannot believe you would do this to your own brother," to detailed explanations of how I had apparently ruined his entire future. According to his version of events, his whole life had been planned around moving into my cottage, despite this plan having been conceived without my knowledge or agreement. "I already told my friends I was moving to your neighborhood," one particularly whiny message read. "Now I look like a complete fool because my own sister would rather sell her house than help family." I kept my responses brief and factual, resisting the urge to engage in arguments. "I sold my cottage for financial reasons. Your living arrangements are a separate issue that you need to resolve independently." My parents employed a completely different strategy. Instead of Tommy's direct anger and accusations, they attempted to negotiate as if we were discussing a business deal rather than a fundamental boundary issue. "Papa and I have been talking," Mama said during one of her daily phone calls. "What if we helped with the down payment on your new place? Something with an extra bedroom where Tommy could stay temporarily, just until he gets back on his feet." "Mama, that defeats the entire purpose. I explained for what felt like the 100th time. I am downsizing intentionally to reduce my financial stress and simplify my life. Adding Tommy to my living situation would create more complications, not fewer. Even distant relatives began inserting themselves into the situation. My cousin Ruth called to lecture me about family obligations. My nephew David sent a lengthy email about how his uncle had stayed with his family during hard times and how it had brought them closer together. None of them acknowledged the crucial difference. Those arrangements had been mutual agreements made with full consent from everyone involved. Throughout this family pressure campaign, I continued the practical work of preparing for my move. The buyers had graciously agreed to let me rent back the cottage for 2 months after closing, giving me time to find a new place and relocate my belongings. The check from the sale sat safely in a high-yield savings account, providing me with financial security I had never experienced before in my retirement years. Working with Susan, I began looking at senior living apartments and small condos in town. After decades of maintaining a large property by myself, the idea of a smaller, maintenance-free living situation actually seemed appealing rather than disappointing. A cozy apartment with no yard work responsibilities and significantly lower monthly expenses represented a different kind of freedom from worry and stress. One afternoon, while touring a lovely retirement community with a library and garden club, my phone buzzed with yet another text from Tommy. "We need to talk face to face. Coming over tonight after dinner." I considered telling him not to come, but decided it might be better to have this conversation in person rather than continuing our heated exchanges through text messages. When I arrived home from the apartment viewing, Tommy's truck was already parked in my driveway and he sat on the front porch steps waiting for me. "I see you decided to show up without asking if this was a good time," I said, unlocking the front door and gesturing for him to follow me inside. The living room was already partially packed with labeled boxes stacked against the walls and my artwork removed, leaving pale rectangles on the painted walls where frames had hung for years. Tommy looked around with a frown, the reality of my move apparently hitting him for the first time since our dinner confrontation. "So you are really going through with this whole thing?" he said, not as a question but as an accusation filled with disbelief. "The cottage is already sold, Tommy. The new family takes possession in 5 weeks. I set my purse down and folded my arms across my chest. "What exactly did you want to discuss?" Tommy ran his hand through his graying hair, a nervous gesture that reminded me of Papa when he was worried about something. "Mama and Papa said I should come over and apologize for how I acted at dinner last Sunday. So I am sorry about losing my temper, I guess." The half-hearted apology hung awkwardly in the air between us like a deflated balloon. "Is that all you came to say?" I asked, sensing there was more to this visit. "No," he admitted, settling onto my sofa without waiting for an invitation. "I came to see if maybe we could work out some kind of compromise here. I am in a really tight spot, Margaret. My landlord is being completely unreasonable about some minor noise issues, which were totally blown out of proportion by jealous neighbors. He refuses to renew my lease no matter what I offer him, and I have to be completely moved out by next Friday. That is unfortunate, but it does not change my situation in any way," I replied, remaining standing to maintain some psychological distance. "The cottage is sold to wonderful people who are excited about moving in. I am relocating to a 1-bedroom apartment that will barely accommodate my own furniture, let alone a roommate. What about lending me some money then?" Tommy asked, leaning forward with what he probably thought was a persuasive expression. "Just enough for first and last month's rent plus a security deposit on a new apartment. I promise I will pay you back as soon as I land another job." A familiar pattern threatened to repeat itself once again. Tommy in crisis, family members expected to provide rescue, promises of repayment that would disappear as soon as the immediate emergency passed. For a brief moment I actually considered agreeing. The money from selling my cottage meant I could afford to help him without creating significant hardship for myself. But then I remembered every previous loan that had quietly become a permanent gift, every promise to do better that had evaporated as soon as the pressure was No, Tommy, I will not be lending you money, I said firmly and clearly. You have had 62 years to learn how to build emergency savings, but you consistently choose to spend everything you earn on immediate pleasures instead of planning for the future. Must be nice to be so perfect and superior, he sneered, the thin pretense of politeness vanishing completely. Some of us have had genuine bad luck in life, not everything handed to us on a silver platter. This has nothing to do with luck or superiority, I said, my patience finally reaching its limit. This is about choices and their natural consequences. You chose to violate your lease agreement repeatedly with loud parties and inconsiderate behavior. You chose to spend your money on entertainment and luxuries instead of building any kind of financial cushion. Now you are experiencing the logical results of those choices. So you are just going to stand there and let your own brother become homeless? Tommy stood up, his voice rising with indignation and self-pity. Your own flesh and blood living on the streets. You have multiple options that do not involve me or my resources, I pointed out calmly. You could ask your drinking buddies if you could sleep on someone's couch temporarily. You could look for a room to rent in a shared house, which would be much more affordable than getting your own apartment. You could even humble yourself and stay with Mama and Papa while you search for something permanent. None of those are realistic options, Tommy insisted, stubbornly. My friends all live in tiny places with no extra space. Roommate situations are for college kids, not mature adults. And Mama and Papa's house is way out in the middle of nowhere with nothing to do and no social opportunities. I could not help but laugh at his description of our childhood neighborhood as the middle of nowhere, since our parents lived in the same pleasant suburban area where we had grown up, less than 20 minutes from downtown. Those all sound like perfectly reasonable options to me, I said. They are just not as comfortable or convenient as moving into my cottage would have been. That is the real issue here, Tommy. You do not want any solution that requires genuine sacrifice or personal discomfort on your part. You have really changed, he accused, grabbing his jacket from the back of the sofa with dramatic flair. Ever since you bought this place, you became different. Like you think you are so much better than your own family. I have not changed at all, I said, quietly but with conviction. I have simply stopped apologizing for having reasonable boundaries and age-appropriate expectations for adult behavior. Maybe it is time for you to consider changing, Tommy. Maybe losing your apartment and your job is exactly the wake-up call you need to finally grow up. Whatever helps you sleep at night in your fancy new apartment, he spat, heading toward the front door with wounded dignity. Have fun living alone while I try to figure out how to avoid sleeping in my truck. The door slammed behind him with unnecessary force. I sank into my favorite armchair and closed my eyes, feeling emotionally drained but also strangely liberated. The confrontation had been unpleasant and difficult, but absolutely necessary for my own well-being. For perhaps the first time in our adult relationship, I had refused to be drawn into the endless drama that seemed to follow Tommy like storm clouds. I had maintained my boundaries despite his emotional manipulation and guilt trips. It felt both terrible and freeing at the same time, like having a painful tooth extracted. The immediate discomfort was intense, but I could already sense that genuine healing would follow this necessary procedure. As I looked around at the half-packed boxes and the home I was preparing to leave behind, I realized I was not just changing physical locations. I was moving forward into a new phase of my life with healthier relationships and clearer boundaries. The next morning brought a surprising text message from Papa that gave me hope. Your mother and I talked all night. Tommy can use the guest room temporarily while he finds his own place. We would appreciate your help clearing out some storage items to make room for him. It was a small victory, but an important one nonetheless. For the first time in decades, my parents were stepping up to help Tommy in a way that did not involve imposing on me or enabling his worst instincts and behaviors. Maybe they were finally beginning to understand the crucial difference between genuine support and harmful enabling. As I continued packing my belongings and preparing for my transition to apartment living, I made a difficult but necessary decision for my own mental health. I needed some space from family drama to focus on establishing my new life without constant interference and guilt trips. I sent a group text to my parents and Tommy explaining that I would be taking a break from family gatherings for the next month. I would remain available for genuine emergencies, but needed time and space to handle my major life transition without ongoing conflict. The responses were predictably mixed and revealing. Mama expressed hurt feelings and confusion about my need for distance. Papa sent a simple but supportive message. "We understand. Take whatever time you need to settle in." Tommy did not respond at all, which was probably the healthiest choice he had made in months. It was not intended as a permanent solution to our family problems, but rather a chance to reset the dysfunctional patterns that had defined our relationships for far too many years. As I sealed up another box of cherished belongings, I felt genuinely lighter than I had in years, despite the bittersweet sadness of leaving my beloved cottage behind. Moving day arrived with that peculiar combination of exhaustion and anticipation that accompanies all major life changes. The moving company I had hired arrived promptly at 7 in the morning, and the systematic dismantling of my life in the cottage began with professional efficiency. Each piece of furniture carried out the door represented decades of memories, careful investments, and pieces of the life I had built for myself over 30 wonderful years. The kitchen table where I had graded thousands of papers and planned countless lessons. The rocking chair where I had read mystery novels on quiet Sunday afternoons. The antique armoire that had belonged to my grandmother and held my most treasured possessions. All of it loaded carefully into a truck destined for a space less than half the size of what I was leaving behind. As the movers worked efficiently around me, I wandered through the increasingly empty rooms, saying a private farewell to the cottage that had been my sanctuary for 3 decades. In the master bedroom, I touched the walls I had painted soft lavender after much deliberation. In the kitchen, I remembered the Christmas morning when I had burned the turkey while talking on the phone with a former student. Each room held layers of memories, some joyful, some challenging, all part of the rich life I was now consciously choosing to leave behind for something better suited to this stage of my journey. When the last box was loaded and secured, I did a final walkthrough with the new owners, the young family who would transform my cottage into their family home. They were obviously excited about their purchase, already discussing which room would be the nursery for their expected second child and where they would plant a vegetable garden. Their enthusiasm was contagious and infectious, and I found myself genuinely sharing in their joy and anticipation. As I handed over the keys that had opened my front door for 30 years, I felt a sense of completion rather than loss. My cottage would become their home, and there was something beautifully circular about that continuation of love and family life. The first few weeks in my new apartment were a significant adjustment period that required patience with myself. The space was modern and efficiently designed with gleaming hardwood floors, large windows that provided excellent natural light, and a compact but well-planned layout that made good use of every square foot. It was stylish and contemporary in a way my cottage had never been, but it took time to adapt to the smaller footprint and the different rhythms of apartment living. What surprised me most was the immediate financial relief I experienced almost from the first day. After paying off the remaining mortgage balance and setting aside money for taxes, I had enough left to eliminate all my other debts and establish the kind of healthy emergency fund I had only dreamed about during my cottage years. My monthly expenses dropped dramatically without the burden of property taxes, homeowners insurance, and constant maintenance issues. For the first time since retirement, I could look at my bank balance without feeling anxious about unexpected expenses. Meanwhile, across town, my family was experiencing their own period of adjustment and learning. True to their word, my parents had cleared sufficient space in their guest room to accommodate Tommy on a temporary basis. According to occasional updates from Mama during our brief weekly phone conversations, the arrangement was presenting some predictable challenges that were opening their eyes to realities they had avoided for decades. "He comes in at all hours of the night," she confided during one call, "and leaves his dirty dishes in the sink even though I have asked him repeatedly to clean up after himself. I had forgotten how inconsiderate he can be." I listened with sympathy but resisted the strong urge to say I had tried to warn them about this exact scenario. This was a lesson my parents needed to learn through their own experience rather than my lectures. The real surprise came about 6 weeks after my move when Papa called with genuinely exciting news that I had not expected to hear. "Your brother has a serious job interview this afternoon," he announced with cautious optimism in his voice. "A real professional position with decent pay at that insurance company downtown. He actually asked me to help him practice answering interview questions last night." "That is genuinely wonderful news," I replied, feeling authentically pleased for the first time in months. "What do you think changed his attitude?" "Well," Papa said with a chuckle that contained both amusement and pride, "your mother decided to implement some firm house rules that we should have established decades ago. Monthly rent due on the first, assigned household chores, and reasonable curfews on weeknights." Tommy threw quite a tantrum initially, but when we both stood firm and refused to back down, he realized we were completely serious this time. "Mama is actually charging him rent." I could not keep the amazement from my voice, since this represented a fundamental shift in their parenting approach. "Not much," Papa admitted with a slight embarrassment. "Just enough to give him some real responsibility and accountability. We are secretly putting that money aside to help him with a security deposit when he finds his own apartment. But the important thing is that he does not know about our plan." It was a small step forward, but represented significant progress in the right direction. For perhaps the first time in their parenting relationship, my parents were treating Tommy like a capable adult with reasonable expectations rather than a perpetual child in need of constant rescue and protection. 3 weeks later, our family gathered for our first Sunday dinner since the confrontation that had changed everything. I arrived with considerable uncertainty about what kind of reception to expect from everyone. To my pleasant surprise, the atmosphere was cordial and respectful, though somewhat careful and restrained. Tommy, dressed in business attire that I had rarely seen him wear in recent years, announced with obvious pride that he had gotten the insurance job and would be starting the following Monday morning. "It is entry-level work," he explained with unusual humility and realism. "But there are real opportunities for advancement if I prove myself capable and reliable." "That is absolutely wonderful, Tommy," I said with genuine warmth and encouragement. "Your community college courses in business should be helpful background for insurance work." He nodded and actually met my eyes briefly before looking away, still somewhat uncomfortable with our new dynamic. It was not exactly an apology for his previous behavior, but it represented a clear acknowledgement that things were changing between us in positive ways. After dinner, while helping Mama clear the table and wash dishes, she surprised me by pulling me into an unexpected but heartfelt embrace. "I owe you a sincere apology, Margaret," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "Your father and I have been doing a lot of talking and thinking, and we realize now that we have not been fair to either of you children over the years. We expected far too little of Tommy and placed too many burdens on you." The acknowledgement brought immediate tears to my eyes after decades of feeling like the responsible child who was taken for granted. "Thank you, Mama. That means more to me than you could possibly know. It has not been easy having him back home at our age," she continued with a rueful but affectionate smile. "But it has been educational for all of us. I think your father and I are finally learning to set the boundaries and expectations we should have established when you were both much younger." Over the following months, a healthier family dynamic slowly but steadily emerged from the ashes of our old dysfunctional patterns. Tommy found a modest but adequate apartment within walking distance of his new job in a neighborhood that fit his budget without requiring family subsidies. It was small and far from luxurious, but it was entirely his own, earned through his own efforts and maintained with his own resources. When he invited the family to his humble housewarming gathering, I brought a spider plant and a gift certificate to the neighborhood grocery store as my contribution to his new independence. "Thanks for coming, Margaret," he said with obvious awkwardness as I was preparing to leave that evening. "I know things have been really complicated between us lately." "Family relationships are always complicated," I replied with an understanding smile. But we are all learning and growing, which is what matters most. For what it is worth, he added, shoving his hands deep into his pockets in a gesture of vulnerability. I understand now why you were so protective of your cottage and your independence. I should never have expected you to sacrifice what you had worked for just because I had made poor choices. It was not a grand dramatic apology, but coming from Tommy, it represented remarkable progress and genuine personal growth. I genuinely appreciate you saying that. And for what it is worth, I am truly proud of what you are building for yourself now. As autumn turned into winter, I found myself settling comfortably and happily into my new life and routine. My apartment had become a real home, decorated thoughtfully with my favorite pieces from the cottage and several new additions that suited the contemporary urban style better. My financial situation had stabilized completely, allowing me to focus on enjoying my retirement rather than constantly worrying about money and maintenance issues. With the proceeds from the cottage sale invested wisely and conservatively, I even began casually looking at the possibility of purchasing again someday, but with much more realistic expectations and practical considerations. The dream cottage had taught me valuable lessons about the important differences between what we think we want and what we actually need, between impressive status and genuine security. When the time came to consider buying again, it would be with clear eyes and practical wisdom rather than romantic fantasies. Meanwhile, my relationships with my family members continued to evolve in positive directions. My parents, having witnessed the beneficial changes in Tommy's life firsthand, began to understand the real damage their well-intentioned enabling had caused over the decades. They still supported both of us as loving parents should, but in much healthier ways that respected our adulthood and personal autonomy. Tommy and I would probably never be best friends, but we had learned to interact with mutual respect rather than resentment and entitlement. One quiet evening, as I sat by my apartment window watching the city lights twinkle like earthbound stars, I received an unexpected text message from Tommy that brought tears of joy to my eyes. Got my first performance review today. Boss says I am doing excellent work and mentioned possible promotion opportunities. Taking myself out to celebrate. Never thought I would say this, but thank you for not letting me move in with you. I needed that push to finally grow up. I smiled through my happy tears, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. The journey to this moment had been painful and difficult for our entire family, but perhaps it had been absolutely necessary for all our growth and healing. Sometimes the hardest decisions really do lead to the most important positive changes. Sometimes losing what you thought you wanted opens the door to discovering what you truly need to be happy and fulfilled. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision that others did not understand but ultimately proved to be exactly right? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like and subscribe to Granny's Voice for more real-life stories about family, boundaries, and finding your own path. Share this video with someone who might be struggling with family expectations or difficult choices. Remember, sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the most beautiful transformations. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you the courage to make the right choices for yourself, even when they are difficult. Thanks for watching Granny's Voice.